I'm going to come now to my favorite piece of all the things I've talked about, which is a strange title, I realize. If Disney ran your hospital, you would view work as theater, not service. So some of you are saying, well, let's hear you out first. I hope that's what you're saying, right? Because, here we go on the Disney kick. When you become a Disney cast member, I thought I'd go back and just reiterate for you the kind of experience I had becoming a cast member. The first thing you learn is that you're really applying to join a culture, not to do a job. You find that in day one. In fact, you find that out before you turn in your application. You actually find that out in your job interview. So between the interview and the day you turn in your application, here's what happens. You come in and turn in your application. On the bottom of the application it says, please do not turn this in until you've seen the movie. I tried to turn mine in because I didn't read that instruction. And she said, what movie? Well, there's the sign. I'm not very good at reading signs. I just fill in all the blanks. Once there's no more blanks, do I have to read anything after that? I didn't know you did, right? And so I'm one of those kinds of people. Myers-Briggs calls them an N. So anyway, I went back to my seat and waited. I got into the movie, and it was about 45 minutes, I think. And in this movie, cast members loved Disney. They sang the praises of Disney. They went on. And some who are new and some who have been there a long time, and all the jobs you can have at Disney, and how they encourage you to just change jobs as many times as you want to get as much experience as you want to. They don't try to just lock you into just one position or one job. That when you do a show somewhere, they all take turns with the boring jobs. And, it doesn't become your job to stand there all day and say, watch your step, watch your step. I guess pretty old after a while. No, everybody, even the manager, is going to take his or her turn saying, watch your step, cute little hat, whatever it is, right? So they learn about this. Oh, and you think, wow, I'm just joining the best place. And then they start getting over into some of the standards that are expected of us if we become cast members. And one of them says, you are always on stage. That means that you are at your best all the time, no exceptions ever, and we expect you to be aggressively friendly. That's the word they used when I was there. I heard later from somebody that they'd had so many complaints with this word aggressive that they changed it. I even forgot what they changed it to, but we know what they meant, right? They're proactive. They say hi first. They speak first. That's what we were taught on this film. And then it slipped over into the way we were expected to be groomed and dressed. Now, they called them appearance guidelines. But you soon learned that these guidelines were rigidly enforced. So, they use the word guidelines instead of standards, and they enforce them like standards. We use the word standards, and we treat them like guidelines. Just an interesting observation. They use a softer word and carry a big stick. We use the big word and carry no stick. That's basically what I'm saying. We use the big stick word, and then we don't have a stick, really. Not that that's a big, important thing. It's just an observation, okay? So I'm not saying we got to go around with a big stick all the time. So where was I in this? Oh, yeah. Then this is the part that gets to you in this film, and you start thinking, well, do I really want to work here? Because you find out that there's certain ways you got to cut your hair at Disney. And there's really no exceptions. Can't have any long hair. Can't have any hair that comes over your ear at all if you're a male. You can't have frosted hair if you're a female. I guess a male too. But no frosted hair. The reason being, your hair has to be a natural color. If it's a color that a person is never born with, then you're out of character at Disney. See? And consequently, they described the earrings. They couldn't be dangling, and they had to be, just very small earrings. And they showed pictures of that. And they said no facial hair on the men. Sorry, but now they'll allow the mustache. By the way, I was looking at you, and I realized when I worked there, I couldn't have worn a mustache. But now they've allowed it finally. This just happened about 3 years ago that they're allowing the mustache in, but no beards of any kind. Well, people sit there and they watch this, and toward the end they start thinking, well, can I conform to that? Here's the nice thing about Disney. You decide if you're going to conform to that before you turn in your application. That's the difference. You have to view before you turn in, with the understanding that if you walk out of here and throw that application away, we didn't even meet you. You'd have no embarrassment. So you go from there, and then that's reinforced in the job interview. Now, if you work here, Fred, these are the standards. Do you think you can live by those standards? And so I get another talk there. I still haven't gone on my job. I still haven't been hired until I've gone through that process. It describes these standards, guidelines, whatever, to me. So orientation then, when I got into orientation, I discovered kind of something different than our orientation, at least the ones that I've seen. The ones that I've been a part of, in fact, trying to help develop the service side of our orientation process. And here's what I noticed. They describe reality instead of a vision. We put a vision up. This is what we want our place to be like. Wouldn't it be wonderful if everybody would do this? Yes, it would be great, And then, what would you like from our other cast members? So we work at the table. This is the way I wish people would treat me, and this is the way we would. This is teamwork, and work. We didn't do any of that stuff at our tables. We didn't do those exercises about vision. Why? Because the vision is already there. It's reality. This is their approach in orientation, is if you work at Disney, here's what's expected. See? And then they describe what's expected. And they also expect you to know a lot of information. So one whole day of Disney is really history. The history of Disney. I mean, you just learn an awful lot about the movies and the characters and, what every little dwarf's name is and Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Why? Because you got to be able to engage the guest. How can you engage a guest if you know nothing about Disney? It's got a huge history. See? Got to be able to not only, and anyway, part of it was going around the park and knowing where everything is. Every single department. Could you imagine new people coming and you go have a big hospital and you go to every single department and you got a map and you're making notes and you're saying when somebody's trying to find such and such, here's where they're going. Here's where you take them. Because you want to take people where they need to go, that kind of thing, right? So they are describing reality. The third thing I noticed is that variation from standards, which they call guidelines, is not tolerated by anybody, not even your peers. Now, how do you get to that level? I don't know. But I'll tell you, I noticed it on day 1. Oh, maybe day 3. But whatever it was. Whatever the day was that I went for orientation, I came up to the desk. The lady looked up. I said, I'm Fred Lee. And she saw my name there. And she looked up and she says, where's your jacket? And I said, well, I left it in the car. And she said, well, you have to have your jacket. I guess that sounds like you have to. So I don't know what she said exactly, but I suspect she said that you'll need your jacket on in here or whatever. But anyway, I said, I got time to get to the car and back. She said, well, you have to be here by 8 because we close the doors at 8 o'clock. And I'll have to reschedule you if you don't. Well, I took off to go get my jacket, and I remembered what the guidelines for that day were for me. It was that I had to wear a jacket with lapels, a leather belt, slacks, shirt with a collar, leather shoes, and socks. Those were all specified as the guidelines to come to orientation, where I'm not going to see a single person in the park. I'm not going to see any customers in orientation, just each other. And not only that, most of these kids that are going to be in orientation are going to be wearing shorts probably out in the hot sun in Florida, and they're going to be dealing with customers who are in bathing suits and T-shirts and flip-flops. And so they're making this big dress-up thing about orientation. So, you could easily say, surely not. They don't mean this. And it'd be easy to say, well, not on a day in August when it is steaming hot. Maybe not my jacket. I just left it in the car. Not thinking, yes, you wear this. It isn't something you arrive in and take off, So I ran back there, and what do you think I saw when I coming back from the car, coming down those steps? All these other people. I could just take around and I could say, oh, no jacket, no collar, a T-shirt, a sweatshirt. Not a sweatshirt in Florida, but, tennis shoes, Levi's, blue jeans. I could see it. I could just take one look at the crowd, and I could see why they had been turned away at the door of orientation, their first happy day at Disney, right? When they had joined the place of their dreams, turned away for the way they're dressed. Teenagers, turned away at the door. So that was my first rebuke at Disney. My second rebuke was when my boss told me to cut my hair because it came down over my ear. And I did, of course. And the third rebuke embarrassed me because it came from a fellow peer, another cast member. We had 3 on our team when we first taught that first seminar to healthcare people. And I had my little part, and these other 2 had bigger parts than me, and the 3 of us. And part of the day is going through the parks. I don't know if any of you have ever gone and taken the Disney's Approach to Customer Service for the healthcare industry. But my peer said in front of my boss when we were debriefing at the end of the 3 days, she said in front of him, and I wish she hadn't because it doesn't seem like the right way to go to me, but she said, Fred, I saw you step over a piece of paper. And I looked at her and I said, surely not. I said, I can't imagine. I know better than that. She said, yes, it happened over by the China Pavilion. It did? My boss is sitting right there taking this in while a peer calls me on the red carpet for not picking up a piece of paper in the park. And you know what her parting shot was? When you work at Disney, you're always setting an example. That's the reason you pick up a piece of paper. You're always setting an example, no matter who you are. Don't care you're a senior vice president of a huge medical center. So what? Pick up a piece of paper like all the rest of us. That's not beneath anybody here. And that's when I discovered that they even call you, how do you create a culture like that? That's the question. They have no slogans or banners as constant reminders. Because that park, they create every scene. Somebody's telling me today how they're meticulous with every detail in every one of these little creations, like the Jungle Cruise, and I don't know whether it's the spaceship, whatever, and we've got the 7 Seas and things like that. Whatever it is, that theme is carried out to the last detail. Well, what would a poster up there telling employees to give better service or to be politer? So what would that do? To ruin the whole spirit of the place, see? And it always bothers me if we have messages to employees where patients can see them. It kind of bothers me whenever I see that. So banners and slogans, I never saw any of those things. And then here's the most interesting thing, is I rarely, if ever, heard the word service used outside of our program that we taught. Outside of that program in the real Disney culture, it was never about service. Because the truth is, Disney is not a service, and I'm starting to think neither are we. If we stopped using the word service, what would we use instead? That's my question. Service is a threadbare word, and I know from my wife's thinking on all of these things with me that it doesn't sound quite right when used in terms of nursing, at least. That nurses don't see themselves as giving a service when they give somebody a bath. That is care of some kind, and that is something better than we would call service, like trying on a pair of shoes and somebody's helping you with a pair of shoes. There is just something a little, we don't know what to use in its place, but we sort of intuitively feel, yes, what we do is more than that. And that's the best word we have, so we say service excellence. Well, I'd like to suggest that we change our thinking first by changing the model that most of us have about our economy and the different sectors of our economy. an economist named Joe Pine III. And some of you may have heard this presentation because he's certainly been around the country, and his book has been a good seller. But here's what he has proposed. He's proposed that although, let's take a look at the three sectors as we normally define them, all right? First of all, we extract the stuff from the ground, whether it's crops that we grow like soybean or oil that we pump out or iron ore that we dig out of our iron ores. We extract something that we call commodities, and there's a huge commodities market based on what is extracted or grown from the earth. Okay, that's the first level of the economy. And the truth is, 100 years ago, most people out in the frontier areas, certainly, were living at the commodities level of life. I mean, they grew their own corn that they turned into flour, and they raised their own meat, and the chickens laid their own. The only eggs they ever saw were their own chickens that laid the eggs, and so on. And they made their own butter from the fat of their own animals and that kind of thing. And so at that level, there's a level of living at the commodities. But as we became more sophisticated, more technologically improved, more populated, then we began to live in clusters and towns, and people take commodities and turn those into goods that we can buy. And we can start exchanging commodities for cash, and the cash now we take and buy goods with. So your Mercedes-Benz or your Beamer or your cake or your, what do I want to say, Folgers coffee, it doesn't matter. They're all in this same sector of manufacturing or producing goods. That's the manufacturing sector, or the sector we call goods. Goods get delivered by what? Services. Goods delivered by services. However, Joe Pine says that there is a whole sector of the economy that is not a service, that doesn't belong in this sector, and has too long been lumped in this sector. And as we become more and more sophisticated, this has become more and more important and needs to finally be broken out by itself, just as when this was when you could break out of this, you had another sector. When you could break out of this and now you could have things delivered to you as services, then you had another sector. And he says we are now ready for the breakout of what is above services. It's always been there. It's just that it hasn't been as important in people's lives, and therefore was absorbed in the service sector. And he called that the staging of experiences. Now, when I say they've always been here, because theater has always been here. I suppose even primitive societies had their form of theater, which was only for entertainment purposes or for the experience. An experience means that you didn't go away with anything except what happened inside of you. If it happens inside of you, it's an experience. If it happens outside of you, it's a service. If I go to take my car in for repair, that happens outside of me. That's a service. If I take my clothes to the laundry and they do my laundry and iron them and hand it back to me, that was a service. But if I go to a movie, who handed me anything? What happened outside of me? Virtually nothing. If I enjoyed the movie, I would call it a great experience. I wouldn't call it a great service. Whoever referred to a theater as a service? It's an experience. Now, the degree to which that experience touches me is what makes me rave about the experience, right? If a movie doesn't hit me, I've walked out. Have any of you walked out of a movie? I've certainly walked out of quite a number of movies. And I thought, this is not an experience I want. I go walk right out of it, see. On the other hand, I've had movies that touched me at such a deep level that they were unforgettable for the rest of my life. One such movie, I doubt, touched anybody in this room as much as it touched me, was Steel Magnolias. And you would have to know something about my life to understand why Steel Magnolias was a powerful, powerful experience for me. First of all, I have a son with juvenile diabetes, which is what Julia Roberts had in the movie. And when she had that insulin reaction in the beauty parlor, big tears came to my eyes. Why? I've seen that. But that was only one level. The next level this movie hit me was the fact that Julia Roberts, who was a young mother with a little tiny boy, I don't know, 1 or 2 year old boy, she goes into a diabetic coma, and this child is the only one in the room, and it takes a neighbor coming in order to discover that she's in a bad way. And she eventually dies. She dies. Well, my first wife, 28 years old, was a young mother. She got a headache one night. Within 24 hours, she was delirious and was in a type of coma. Her little boy, my son, 2 years old, was in the room as the only person because I had gone on a camping trip with a bunch of teenagers that I was a school teacher at the time, and I'd taken them. I'd been the sponsor of a camping trip. And I'd gone on this camping trip and taken my 5-year-old daughter with me. So we had mother and the little boy and father and the bigger girl on a trip. Nobody's there. Neighbor comes into the house because she hears the sound in there and knew I was out of town. Nobody answered the door. She came in there and found my wife delirious with her little boy jumping kind of on the bed with her. And all she could say over and over and over was, I can't. And that's all she could say. She couldn't respond to her name. She couldn't respond to anything, just I can't. 2 months later, she was dead from encephalitis, from a mosquito bite. So that scene in the movie where a young mother loses her life, and then, of course, I've got grandparents to face, her mother and family who lost a daughter. And it's like this movie was so closely paralleled with my life that it was an experience of deep, deep significance to go through this and see how people played those roles that I had already experienced in my life. A very, very powerful movie, can't be forgotten. It's not a movie I want to see very often. It was just powerful because of it did. Because I don't necessarily want to be taken to that grief very often. But when I see it, I recognize it. Now, if I see child abuse, I will be very incensed and angry, but it never happened to me. I can imagine when you see a movie where if that was your experience, you bring part of yourself to an experience, is what I'm saying. The more you bring to it and the more it resonates with you, we call it a greater experience because of that. Now, if Disney is an experience, is not a service. Nobody says, we went to Disney and got great service. Well, you might say it in the hotel, but that's not what you mean by the parks. You say it was a great experience. The kids absolutely loved it. That's what you say. Now, I know a hospital is not a pleasant place for most people. But let me ask you this. Does most of what happens in the hospital happen inside of you, not outside of you, if you're a patient? Yes. Does the experience affect you on more than one level in a hospital? Yes, it does. It can affect you emotionally, physically, mentally, and even spiritually. Dramatic effect on you. That means you are involved in a total experience in the hospital more than you are involved in getting a service. Now, using this little model here, let me lighten it up a little bit. I just talked about this grief and stuff, and I'm seeing some of you actually get tears in your eyes. Thank you for your empathy. But let me come back and lighten this up slightly by saying that let's take a cup of coffee and demonstrate it on a continuum where value gets added, all right? When coffee is extracted at the commodities level and you buy it in a large quantity, you might be paying, we'll say, you're paying 2 cents a cup. Somebody packages that and puts Folgers on the can, and they sell it to you as goods, and you might be paying 10 cents a cup for that. You don't get hung up on whether I'm right or wrong about these numbers because, I can see some of you already thinking, well, is it really 10 or is that more like 6? And is that more, this doesn't matter. Okay, that part doesn't matter. Right? Yes, all right. Just stay with me here, right? Don't get lost in the details, all right? So then these goods here are delivered as a service in a restaurant where I'm getting food service, and that's probably worth $1 there. But if you can make coffee an integral part of an important experience, and it's actually part of the experience, you might get $3 for that. In all kinds of tampering with the coffee to get it to be just the absolute perfect thing you ever drank. Because that's primarily the experience. You can get a lot more money for that. Now, you think I'm talking about Starbucks, but I'm not. I'm not talking about Starbucks because I don't think I've been in a Starbucks more than 3 or 4 times in my life. The Starbucks is not a very important thing to me, partly because I don't drink much coffee. I have rarely a cup of coffee. But there is a place where I do like to get a very specially blended kind of coffee. And it's at Barnes & Noble or Borders, right? Yeah, I don't know. Am I going to call Barnes & Noble an experience or am I going to call it a service? I think they've stopped being a service. Borders is the same thing. The first time I went into one of these Barnes & Nobles that had coffee brewing and chairs all over the place and tables where I could spread things out, had a sign on the wall that had letters this big. You could read it clear across the back. Beautifully, part of the wallpaper was this banner right into the wall, either painted by hand or something. Beautiful script across there, and here's what it said. Have a cup of coffee. Not buy a book. Have a cup of coffee with your favorite author. Does that capture it? It's exactly what I love to do. I can't think of anything. I do like to go to movies. I'll grant you, but I would have a hard time choosing between a movie and 2 hours at Borders. The experience for me are equally on a par, and many times I would choose having a cup of coffee with my favorite author over a movie. But it'll be the experience I'm buying. See what I'm talking about? They've elevated that. How many of you have ever taken a kid to Chuck E. Cheese? Now, is that a food service? Or is that an experience? Right? That's an experience. You see what I'm saying? Now, if Chuck E. Cheese and Barnes & Noble, and by the way, just to contrast how different this is, let's just go back a few years and imagine you going into a Barnes & Noble bookstore that was just typical of all bookstores. And you were trotting in there with your little folding stool. How about that? Because they never had a bench in one of those places, right? They don't ever encourage you to sit down. So you bring your own little stool. And how about bringing a thermos of coffee? And why don't you just set yourself up over there and spend the morning reading their books and magazines and then leave them on the floor and walk off? You think they'd welcome you back again? Do you think they would even see you as a customer if you did that? They wouldn't. If you aren't there to buy a book, please leave. That's the way I would feel. I'd have to have pretty thick skin to do that every day for a while. Till somebody spoke to me. And you can bet they're talking about me and what an obnoxious person I am, not buying anything. And yet at Barnes & Noble, they shifted in and said, well, have a cup of coffee here. On us. Leave your books on the floor. You don't have to buy a book. Enjoy reading what you want to. See what a difference. That's the paradigm shift here. This is quite dramatic. No wonder this guy is saying, this is not a service. This is some other category that as the more we've gotten sophisticated, it has broken out. I think hospitals have broken out with that. We belong in that category. We can stop talking about us being a service, and we can talk about what? The patient's experience. Can you imagine how much different this must sound to a group of nurses who have just looked at their Gallup scores? And the director of nurses sits down with a unit that's gotten their Gallup scores, and they're trying to analyze their service in this department. I don't know that we're really giving as good a service as we think. Our scores don't seem to be telling us that people are getting service excellence, folks. Let's say that that's your tune. Let's change that and try that back that up and try that on a different track. We get out the scores, we lay them out, and we're going to say, well, we have the patient's experience here. I guess our question is, how can we improve various parts of the patient's experience so that they will leave with a better impression? So what are the impressions they're getting? Do you see how the conversation about the patient's experience is different than your service? If you hammer at me all the time for more service, then it is all about me. and I get defensive, and I am not adequate, and I'm not performing, and I'm not doing enough. That's what I hear when you hammer on me about service. But if you constantly bring up, as Deborah Stacy did yesterday, right, with your staff, not how can we give better service and why aren't we doing better service, if you instead constantly bring up what? The patient's experience. How can we improve the patient's experience today? Let's look for opportunities to improve the patient's experience. Let's look for opportunities to be special and compassionate to our patients and stop using that word service. You could get rid of that word like this, at least in the patient care areas. And it would do no damage and actually change the conversation to a gentler, more positive, less defensive context. If you could bring yourself to do that. But you know, that's just the beginning of where we're going here. Because a lot of other terminology could change too. Now, I'm not so sure that we have to remove service from the departments that serve the frontline caregiver. You know, I can still see that housekeeping may be a service, but you know it can still change dramatically if the housekeeping director says we are all part of the patient's experience. All of us are helping to create a better patient experience. So when you clean rooms, when you clean bathrooms here, you're making it, you're like you're on a stage creating a great experience for our patients and their families. And I like suggestions on how we can make that experience better. So even if it's a service department, we normally think of, well, that has to be a service. They are part of the overall production. So it's just like the lighting guys on the stage are also part of the experience. The cameraman is part of the experience, even though, you see, they're not out there as the caregiver is giving that frontline experience. Even the people behind the scenes are still part of the experience. So theoretically, we could get rid of that word service if we concentrated on it and gave it our effort. If it made sense, obviously, to do it first. Now from this book, I'm going to take you two quotations from this book I'm sharing with you. This doesn't mean that experiences rely exclusively on entertainment. Entertainment is only one aspect. Rather, companies stage an experience whenever they, and here's the key words, they engage the customer, connecting them with in a highly personal and memorable way. Engaged, personal, memorable. Does this describe healthcare? Does this describe a physical therapist job? Does this describe respiratory therapy? Engaging the patient, connecting them in a highly personal way. You give a patient a bath, I mean, how much more is this going to be? And it's going to be something memorable, and it'll be a question about how can we make this experience as good as we can make it. Another statement, all prior economic offerings are at arm's length. Outside the buyer, experiences are inherently personal, as I've already said. They actually occurred with any individual who has been engaged on an emotional, physical, intellectual, or even spiritual level. If it describes Disney, it describes us even more, because I'm not sure Disney delivers on all four of those, but I know that we do in patient care. All four of those. See, not every experience, it's just like not every movie is going to hit me on all levels. Some movies will just hit me intellectually. Somebody else will, emotionally, or it's humor or whatever. And I mentioned one movie that hit me on a lot of levels, and then that became much more like I would liken to what a patient experiences. It's on so many levels that to call it a service probably doesn't do justice to our caregivers. Another sign at the Wilderness Lodge, backstage. None of these signs are out there where the guests can see them, and there's very clear where backstage is because they have their own, they have their own cafeteria. The people who work at the front desk do not show up in the restaurant where guests are. They have their own cafeteria downstairs, and it's out of sight. And so back there where their time cards and everything are, backstage, they call it, here's one of the signs. It says, think Disney experience. Not just your department service, so to speak here. Or even this is a hotel. This may be a hotel, but you're an employee here who should be thinking, how does this hotel enhance the Disney experience? As if that is some really special experience. Well, we could paraphrase. Think patient experience. not just your department. What do we do in our department? Well, we deliver trays to the patient room. Cook food, deliver trays, do the dishes. I mean, you could describe it like that. But instead to say, well, no, we're part of the patient's experience. We need to keep thinking, what is the patient's experience when we deliver our trays? And then finally, it's not just a department or a hospital. I would say one more you could add here. I think we could be great enough in this organization to start talking about to start talking about the Northern Nevada, Medical Center experience. What is the Northern Nevada medical experience for a patient? And you can start using, that's a little cumbersome. It's not quite as easy as the Disney experience because you've got 4 or 5 words there. But the point I'm making, right, is to the point, and that is, can we define our experience as you tried yesterday? Yesterday I thought those breakout sessions that you suggested were fun to listen to because they describe the culture and stories and things like that. You're describing the experience that you believe people are having here. To produce an experience, start with a script. See, I'm changing some other words too. This is my word. If in the theater environment, the script is what we would call the plan on paper. It's the plan on paper. I don't know if any of you have any of you read a script, a true script, not just the words in a script, but a real one that is handed to you? I certainly have. And it may have 2 pages of information that is not words that anybody's going to say, right? And even when people are saying words, it will say, Jack, parentheses, angrily, right? And then gives you the text here. And then Mary, turning to Jack, with a glare, and indignantly says. And then you've got the tone and everything worked in to a script. And so all through the script, you have these, by the way, you're here, this is the context. He walks into the room, stage left, stage right, the lighting is down, there's a person on the couch, and you can't see a person over here. And all that description is in the total script. The script has to be able to read, and you can visualize the whole thing top to bottom. It is far more than dialogue, is what I'm trying to say. So a director takes this thing that's far more than dialogue and creates a reality out of it. That's what a director does, but you start with that script. The more detailed the script, the better the director knows what to do to begin with. So what would that suggest to us if we were creating our department with a script in mind? Well, yes, we would have the dialogue in there when people walk up, but we'll have a lot more. We'll start with where they park, probably. We'll start with where they get information about how to find our department, because we're going to be like a camera now, following that guest all the way through the typical process that they're going to go through, and we're going to say every step in this process, what should be our script here? What's the ideal script? This is what they do now, and what would be the ideal script, see? When some of you started to say yesterday that the front place didn't have a warm, people sort of felt abandoned when they walked in, or at least not instantly greeted, you were talking about a script, even though nobody said what the words should be that the greeter says. You see what I'm saying? Now, if we hire a greeter, I suspect that greeter will probably practice some words that would be nice to say when people come up, and we'll improve the script as we go. And that's all we're talking about. You would place the success in the hands of a director who's obsessed and accountable for, and our words now, instead of the audience's experience, you would place this in the hands of somebody obsessed with the patient's experience. So I'd want to start hiring and holding managers accountable for what? Not the service that they're giving so much necessarily. I'm in a new environment now. I'm holding you all managers accountable for the total patient experience from the time they walk in here, no matter where you work. And then I would add to that, you cast for talent now. Because the script calls for a certain kind of person who will play the housekeeper, certain kind of person that will play the spouse, the certain kind of person that will play the physician. You see what I'm saying? And you cast for the talent for the kind of person. You're not really casting for a real doctor, a real housekeeper, or anything else, because that part they can learn to do, but the talent of being what this person needs to be like, is not that easy to teach, see. So you look for the talent. And I have more to say in a minute about that. Here's a quote from Walt Disney himself. Walt Disney said, "The first year I leased out the parking concession, brought in the usual security guards, things like that. I soon realized my mistake. I couldn't have outside help and still get over to them my idea of hospitality." You know, you think you're a cop. Well, I'm looking for somebody who doesn't think like a cop. And so he said, so now we hire and train our own people. I tell security officers, for instance, that they are never to consider themselves cops. They are there to what? Help people. Now, what is he casting for? He's saying, I can't cast for a cop. I have to cast for what talent here? The talent of helping people, making them feel welcome here. Friendly, that is a different talent than outside agencies that supply security to an organization seem to look for. So we in Disney, because we concentrate on the total experience, have to cast for it in a different way when we hire people than a person who actually gets supplied to us by agencies. Do we use agencies in hospitals? Do they train them in the same philosophy that we would? Walt Disney found out that when they don't, you lose in the total experience. We left a blank yet on this page. And as you look at what this blank is, you're probably guessing what to put in this blank. It's about coaching. So here's what belongs in the blank, which I think will probably surprise you. You would teach an acting principles instead of courtesy skills, or at least not just courtesy skills. Now this, up to now, I think maybe you've been with me, right? The experience part, okay, I got you convinced. We're more like theater than we are like a bank where you cash your check, that happens outside of you. But now are we really going to go here with the acting, And I think we would think that because we have a distorted or even wrong notion of what acting is. And I know I can speak from experience because I have been in, for quite a long time actually, an actor's workshop. Not now, but for about 1.5 years, I was in an actor's workshop. Therefore, in fact, I'm SAG eligible. I don't know if anybody who's done enough acting or know anything about it to know what a coup that is, by the way. SAG eligible means if I send $600 to SAG, I'm automatically a SAG member. Which for all these aspiring actors and actresses, just that is what they dream of, is when they become SAG eligible. The reason it's eligible is you shouldn't have to pay your dues for years before you get a part. But once you SAG eligible, then somebody offers you a part that's a SAG movie, which is virtually all movies are SAG movies. All you have to say is, yes, I'm SAG eligible, which means if they choose me, I'll pay the dues. And if I'm not chosen, I don't have to. So it's the same as being a SAG member. And I get checks from SAG for a part that I did, and it gets replayed so many times on television that I keep getting these little checks, I don't know, $5 or something. I mean, it's not a big deal, except it keeps reminding me that, SAG pays me a check on a regular basis. I think it was, what was it that I was in? I can't even remember right now. Do you remember? No. America's Most Wanted? Oh, dear. Is that what I was in? Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about acting, because I know something about acting. And any of you who have been watching the Bravo channel will pick up on this when they do these interviews with actors. That is not about their private life so much as their technique of acting and what they've learned in acting class. And it's called, help me out here, Patty. What's the name of that show? Inside the Actor's Studio. Right. So let's take a look at what acting is. First of all, acting is not pretending. That's the first thing we want to get across. Actors learn how to be real, actually. They don't learn how to pretend. When Sally Fields cried in that movie, I thought it was real. I didn't think she was pretending. That's what we mean. And you could get away with pretending on the stage because nobody's up close enough to see if it's real. But you can, this is one of the principles the acting teacher taught us. You can be bigger than life on the stage, but if you try to be bigger than life with a camera, then you look ridiculous. See, you're ridiculous. People don't talk that big. People don't talk over the top. They're not that pretending. What the camera sees is up so close that if it isn't real, the camera you know through the camera's eyes up that close that this person, their mind is somewhere else. They're trying to cry, but they're not really sad, you see. So that's the first principle. Second thing is acting, of course, involves intense listening. So when we talk about teaching great acting skills, we teach people to truly listen not just to the words, but to what? The feelings behind the words. And allow myself to be touched by your feelings behind the words. Even if your feelings are anger, I am still responding to the feelings too behind the word. That's what a great acting is. Listening so closely, you're listening with your whole emotional being to another person's whole emotional being. Acting, as John Wayne said, is more like reacting than acting. So you're reacting to another person's emotional state. Acting engages the whole range of human emotions. Acting relies on, this is where I'm trying to get to, sense, memory, and imagination to become real. And I'll just put the next sentence on here. Acting is the talent, then, of becoming emotionally available through empathy with a character. That's the talent of a great actor and a great actress, is to be emotionally available. So how do you do this? I want to go back to those two words, sense, memory, and imagination. Sense memory means it's something that happened to you that you think about in your memory that brings those feelings back to you. That's out of your memory. Now, if it never happened to you, as I said about child abuse, I was never abused as a child, then I would have to totally imagine what it must have made me feel like and try to bring the feelings through imaginations. Those are the two ways we get our feelings, either from memories, which are more powerful, or imagination, see. You know, when my spouse died at 28, I remember holding it all together actually beautifully the day of the funeral. People would come over, my friends would come over, people drive long distances, we'd have a big potluck, they'd bring meals and we'd sit around, and there was a lot of talk about what she was like and what a wonderful person she was, and we shared in that common experience of knowing her. But do you know what was in my mind with all of my friends? You think you understand what I'm going through. It is so much worse than you can even imagine, that I am not particularly touched by the fact that you're touched, because there's your spouse. I mean, I'm grateful that they're there, but in the back of my mind, that's how I hold it together, is because none of you know how bad this is, you know. Until I went down the hallway and I ran into my uncle, actually my wife's uncle, but I called him uncle. And he was an elderly person, and I hadn't said much to him. He had just been sitting quietly in a corner, and I was headed down the hall to the restroom, and he was coming out down the hall the other way, and he put his arm around me, and he said, "Fred, I buried my wife when she was 30 years old. I know exactly what you're going through, and I have to tell you, as bleak and awful as it feels today, I am here to tell you that you will heal. I just want you to know you will heal, even though it feels like you never will." What do you think happened to me? When he said this happened to me, I was reduced to tears. And it took me quite a while to get my composure after that remark and come back into the room with my friends who had never been there. That's why our support groups are so important, because their memory is so important to the person who is going through what they're going. And this shared experience brings a degree of empathy we don't really trust from anybody who says, "Well, I understand how you feel." What we should learn to say is, "I can't imagine how you feel, but as far as my imagination can go, it says this would be one of the worst experiences I could ever go through." And I'm even careful today. I know that I can be of real comfort to a person who's lost their spouse, but I am very careful not to assume that they will see in me very much comfort if they had a teenager who committed suicide or was murdered. I think that is off the scale in another direction that I could not say, because I lost somebody Just as I can't say because I lost my mother, I would understand you losing a spouse. So we do know that for us to truly connect, it has to be quite specifically like us. You have to have really had diabetes if I have diabetes. And you have to have type 1 because I'm type 1 and type 2. That's just not enough empathy for me because type 2s just don't know what type 1 is really going through. That kind of thing is important in our association with other people. I've even thought one time, I suggested this to a chaplain. I don't know, this hospital doesn't have a chaplain probably, right? Do you have a chaplain? No. You have chaplains from outside who come in and do this. Well, hospitals that the Florida hospital had chaplain. I had a whole chaplaincy department representing various denominations. And I used to think, it would be a great thing for a chaplain to do to get around to the employee family and know the stories of grief and pain that people have gone through. Because after I've got some distance from this tragedy in my life, I don't mind if the chaplain were to say to me, Fred, there's a man over here whose wife is probably not going to make it. And he is in real grief. And I can pray with him, but you know what he would probably care about more? Is if you came up a complete stranger and said, I heard about you, and I just wanted you to know that this happened to me, and I am so sorry. Is there anything I can do in any way? And that'll probably mean more than me praying with him. And I thought, if we shared, this person had this happen, this person had this happen, this person had this happen to him. And he knew, I think it'd be a wonderful thing to be told once in a while when somebody went through something that you went through, and you would have the courage to go in and say, I've been there, I know what you're going through. And we have a support group. I go to this, and it might be helpful for you too. That's a wonderful thing to say to somebody. That's what acting really is trying to get in the same emotional place with a character. I realize it's a character. But nevertheless, it's trying to become emotional through sense memory. Now, in order to practice this sense memory, our acting teacher would have us go back in our memory to something that either made us very, very angry or some bottled up anger we never expressed. And so we would pretend, let's just say that I pretended that they'd put a parent in front of you and say, I want you to say to this parent all of the things that they never did for you. See, you never did this, you never did this. And you begin to get all worked up over it. That's all sense memory. And I'll never forget the night that we were to do the sadness thing, the exercise for sadness. Now, we're all very close in this room. And so I think I had to go first, in fact. And this was the thing we had to do. You're to describe an event in your life that makes you sad, the memory of makes you sad. And to just so that we don't get any backstory or forward story and we don't get too intellectual about this, you're to just describe one scene as you would in a picture on a stage, and you just draw the picture for us. We don't want to know what happened that got you here. Don't want to know what happened afterwards, just what happened in this scene. That's it. Well, I couldn't choose between the various ones that I had. And so I said, I'll pick this one. And so I described this scene that would always make me sad if I went back and pictured this scene. And I said that I'm in a beautiful garden. There's trees everywhere. There's beautiful green grass. It's springtime. And the bright, brilliant blue sky, and the sun is shining in the midst of all this beautiful, beautiful garden and sunshine. I'm sitting on some chairs. There's a hole cut in the ground of this beautiful grass. Above the hole is a casket. Beside the casket is my little 5-year-old daughter. She's wearing a pink dress. I'm supposed to describe the scenes. Pink dress, white socks, knee socks, black patent leather shoes, golden hair, just done beautifully. She has a little rose in her hand, and she throws the rose onto that casket. And then my little boy, who's only 2 years old and by my side here, watching his sister throw that rose, says to me, "Daddy, is Mommy really in there?" And that was my scene. Now, when I told this scene, what do you think my eyes were doing? Tearing up, crying, because I was in a place and I was reliving it with a lot of, more deeper than I don't want to relive it quite with that. But that's the point. The point is this: when we have had an experience like somebody else, we are more capable of empathy than when we have not. But we are still capable of empathy even if we've never had the experience through imagination. Do you believe that? Yeah. Imagination is what triggers our emotions, period. You know the old stimulus response diagram? Stimulus, arrow, response. Well, in the middle there should be I for imagination, because what you respond to is what you imagine the stimulus is about. See? If I imagine that you're trying to insult me, I have a different reaction than if I imagine you're simply kidding me in a nice way, in a friendly way, right? Haven't you seen people? They think they're kidding and you feel like they were insulting you. Their motive. So my imagination colors my response to anything. That is the secret for doing this. We had a little acting textbook. It's only about this big. You can order it in Borders. Not that anybody here would want to. Except that I just wanted to say what the first sentence in this book and the title of this book is kind of intriguing because it sets the tone. It was our acting textbook in our class. We had a directing textbook and an acting textbook. The acting textbook was called No Acting Please. Isn't that an interesting title? And then the first sentence went like this: acting is the art of creating genuine realities on the stage. No matter what the material, the actor's fundamental question is, what is the reality here, and how can I make it real to me? Now, you know, I could just change one word in here and say the same thing about nursing. To paraphrase, nursing is the art of creating genuine realities on the hospital stage. No matter what the event, the nurse's fundamental question is still the same as an actor's fundamental question. What is the reality of this patient's experience that they're going through, and how can I make that real to me? We talked about compassion. We said compassion has to come from a real place yesterday, right? Or it's not valued. We can't make it up. We can't pretend it. And just as my acting teacher used to say, Fred, I didn't see you coming from a real place. Back this all up. What was going through your head? She meant she could see me acting. And if she could see me acting, then I was not coming from a real place because he ought not to be acting. That was her term. And so in the same way, we would say that a nurse's compassion also has to come from a real place. And it's by imagining what the patient is going through and making it real to me. So are you more with me now than you started out about nursing and these things that we do? We might teach more, coach more at the acting level of coaching. See, the coach doesn't get mad because you didn't say a word right. I mean, a director. The director doesn't say cut, cut. Doesn't say that usually because you use one word instead of another that didn't come from the script. They're looking far more for how real was that? How real was that? Cut, that still isn't there. That still isn't there. Still isn't real enough. See, that's usually what the reason is for cutting a scene. So now let's just review. We introduced a bunch of terms here, and I am going to come back to one term especially and give a little illustration. But first of all, from delivering a service to what? We already know what we need to put here, right? Staging and experience. So we're going to talk now about the patient experience instead. From service excellence, which is a term that we use a lot in hospitals. If we're going to get away from the word service, then we got to get away from service excellence and talk about instead how can we create memorable experiences with the family, with the patient, with visitors. How can we make that a memorable? Memorable is our key word. Remember Deborah Stacy? If they can't remember something special, why would they talk about us? 3, from being courteous now, which is important. We certainly spent a great deal of yesterday talking about courtesy. But from simply being courteous, if you want to raise the bar from good to great, then you would talk far more about how do we engage our patients and guests. You can be courteous without engaging a person. Would you agree with that? Of course. What does engaging a patient look like that would be different than courtesy? It would be what? Give me some examples of engaging a patient or their family. Well, you just don't want to speak up right now, I guess. Getting to know them, right, as a person, getting to know something of their history, getting to know that they grew up in France. You know, if you got to know me, you know what you'd find out pretty fast about me. If you engaged me for very long, you'd find out, as this table has already found out, because they engaged me during the break. They wanted to know more about me than I've told you folks, and that is that, you know, my grandparents both went to China in 1909 and 1911. So my parents were both born in Shanghai, next door to each other, and they grew up as missionary kids all the way through high school in China, and then they went to college, got married, went to China again until they were 65. So in other words, they spent their entire lives, except college and a couple of years in war and a furlough or two, in China. So where do you think I was born? Well, I was born in China. I was born near the Tibetan border. You know, this is kind of, and you know, if you engaged me as a patient, you'd probably learn this about me. And do you know doctors who engage their patients makes the difference in their loyalty? Doctor feel like they really know you. My mother changed health plans because she didn't like the doctor. And then I read some research. Actually, I read the research before, and she was the proof of the research. The research shows that people join health plans for the cost of the plan, but they leave the plan because of how the doctor treats them. And by inference, the doctor's staff. Now, that's very interesting to physicians, because physicians like to believe that there's no more loyalty among patients because the HMOs have produced the false loyalty by saying, you have to go to this doctor. So keeping them or leaving them, this patient's forced to come here anyway. But the people who commissioned the research are the HMOs, who are now concerned about retention, because once you have saturated the market and skimmed off all the valuable people that can pay their bills and pay for that HMOs, you know, they don't really want the indigent, right? Once you've saturated the market, how are you going to grow? You can only grow by stealing them from another HMO, right? And you don't want them stealing yours, so you need to know what doctors are driving them out, or whatever is driving them out of the system. Well, then the research shows that they leave because of the doctors. That means in a saturated market, loyalty comes back into play again. And now the HMO is saying, we don't need you anymore in the health care plan because we're losing patients because of you. Because our feedback from patients are this, this, and this. That's why they commissioned this research, this fascinating research. My mother was a perfect example of this. She taught nursing in China for years out of Chinese textbooks and translated English textbooks into Chinese for nursing students in anatomy and physiology and various things like this. I'm just trying to say she's a brilliant woman and she has all her marbles. And she's very smart. But this doctor that she was assigned by her HMO treated her like her age, which was 87, 88, 89 years old. I guess this is an 89, year 89 is where the story goes. Well, it was the last straw when he finally really talked down to her and he says, I am not going to answer that sentence. I'm not going to answer that question. She couldn't believe he would say that. You know why? Because I already told you last time. And if you're not going to listen, I'm not going to tell you again. And she thought, nobody's going to talk to me. I don't care who you are, right? I don't care what credentials you have. I don't care if it's an HMO, it's the only doctor that they'll assign to me. That's the last time you'll see me. You're not going to be treated that way. Change plans, goes to another doctor. This is the funny part of the story. Happens that on the day after her birthday, she was talking to me on the phone. She said, by the way, I had to go in yesterday to see my doctor. This new doctor was a woman, and her name was Becky. And she said, I went in to see Becky, their new doctor. And they put me in a little room, as they usually do, and I was dressed and everything, because she never talks to you until, she comes in and talks to you fully dressed. And so I was waiting for her to come in the room, and she opened the door, and the whole staff came in and stood around me and sang happy birthday. It's our new doctor. Is that a different from, I'm not going to tell you again? You know, they sang happy birthday, and one of the nurses opened up her sack lunch and brought out a brownie, and they cut the brownie into 6 pieces. And they said, we don't have a cake for you today, but we can each have a piece of this brownie and pretend it's a cake. We love you, Mrs. Lee. I mean, come on, right? It's those little things like that that nail it. That's engaging the guest. You notice when it's the guest's birthday. It happens to be you get out the charts based on their birthday, but you know, you don't click. Oh, today is her birthday. She didn't come in there saying today's my birthday. This was a complete surprise to her. You think that doctor nailed her loyalty? Oh, yes, sure. You think if she hears a story about how this doctor might have gotten her degree in Mexico or somewhere, that it matters to her? No, actually, she wouldn't, see. Because she figures she wouldn't be practicing if she didn't pass her boards, and after that, then these things, engaging the patient is so important. You know, another thing I heard hospitals doing, and I haven't seen this. I wish I could actually see it, but this is the way I understand it works, and that's they get the hospital story. They have a storyteller, designated person on the staff, who comes in, and her assignment, or his assignment, is to get the patient's story typed up on one page. So you come in, interview this patient a little bit, and you say, well, where did you grow up? And, you know, you'd learn all this stuff about me. And then you would type this all up one page. And that nobody can wait on that patient. Nobody can come in and care for that patient who hasn't read the patient's story. Because it is the story that begins to have you in your imagination make this a real person with a real life, an interesting life, and you'll connect and engage at where it touches you. You know, oh, I'm from the Midwest, I'm from New York, whatever. Oh, really? That must mean you must like the Red Sox, that kind of stuff. You see, you see it in the story, and you will engage at your particular level. I have 6 kids too. You know, whatever that level is, right? You will engage this person at that level. I think that's wonderful at trying to move from simply being a courteous service to be an engaged experience. From hiring for a job to casting for a part. This gets a little more tricky. Casting for a part. What would that sound like? Well, that gets back at our talent. Remember the talent one I said? You're looking for talent. Let's say that I say to a person who is in registration, and I say to this person in registration, let's just pretend, because I probably wouldn't do this, but let's say I say to her, I'd say, because I like the word, well, I'm going to say set apart. I'm going to go to the next one. This is where I want to say it. Instead of doing a task, you're playing a role. These kind of work together, as you understand, right? So I'm going to talk about this one. And so I think I want to see if she knows what her role is in this organization. Say, what part does she play? Is your role is the part that you play. These 2 words go together. So I say, what's your role here? Oh, well, my role is to get patient information. No, that's your job. What I want to know is, what is your role here? She'd probably give me a blank look like that. You know? And I'd say, you know, your role is different than job. Well, I'm not sure what you're driving at. Then I might say, well, why did they hire you for this job? Well, I don't know, because I came in here and I just said I wanted a job, and do you have any openings? And I guess when I filled out my application, I said I had some computer skills, and they must have jumped on that and say, well, you have some computer skills. What about registration? And I said, well, sure, I'll take whatever you got. I said, well, no, that's still your job. Registering, doing computer, that's a skill, that's not a role. Your computer skill. Now this person's at a complete loss, right? However, had this person had the right conversation on the hiring process, she would have been clearly told, what? I know you got computer skills, Marjorie, but in this organization, you play an important part in creating the experience that we want all our patients and visitors to have. The reason I like you for this job is because I think you would make a great first impression, and that's your role here. Everybody who comes in here, I know you're going to be getting their information, but your real role here, the part that you play in the experience of our community, is that you're the first person they probably say very much to. They might have said, where is the ED to somebody, and gone down here, but you are the real one that makes them feel welcome. And I need a person who can do this information and make a great first impression. And I like what I see. Can you do that every day? Or is this you today? Or will I see this every day, right? Will I see what I'm seeing today that I like to play my role? See, now I would love it if this person said, oh, my role, oh, I see what you knew. My role is to make a great first impression and make people feel welcome when they come here. Then I'd say, okay, there's a person with a boss who made an issue over the patient experience and the role that you play in it. You could do the same thing in housekeeping, right? You could say to somebody in housekeeping, you know, I see you got experience here and we need a housekeeper on such and such a floor. But here's your part. Here's your role. We find on the not the Press Ganey, I'm sorry. So you don't have Press Ganey. Well, let's say you had the Press Ganey. On our Press Ganey, number 2 in patient satisfaction is cheerfulness. I need a person who is a housekeeper that can do her job or his job, but you also come to work cheerful every day, make everybody around you feel cheerful. Can you do that? Now here's the secret to this. If you have that conversation at the very beginning, you can easily have it later. If you don't have it at the beginning, it is very difficult to have that conversation later, and you will probably procrastinate until when you finally have it, it's a big mess when you try to deal with it, because why didn't you deal with it sooner if it's such a big deal? You know, we waited 5 years to speak to this person. You've seen people that have waited 10 years before anybody spoke to them about their attitude, right? But if you made it an issue on day 1, you can make it an issue any day from thereafter. Because here's all it sounds like. You know, Jane, do you remember the conversation we had the first day you came in and I did my first interview with you? Yeah? You bet people remember their first interview with their boss, right? It's not something you forget. Do you remember that first conversation? Now, do you remember I made an issue of several things? No, don't remember that. Do you remember me saying something about the role that you play here, the part that you play on the hospital stage here? Do you remember me saying something about that? Oh, yeah, I do remember something about that. Do you remember what I said was the key impression I hoped you would make every day? Yeah, you said something about cheerfulness. I say, yes, I said a lot about cheerfulness, and it hasn't changed. I have to have a person in your position who is always cheerful, always a team helper with the rest of the team. And I wish it could be you, but I'm not seeing it. You can have that conversation. But it's pretty hard to have that if you never made it an issue from day 1. If you didn't hire for the part, if you didn't hire for the right talent for that job in the first place, you just put anybody there with a skill and only come to find out that that skill is not the most important part. They have another talent that would have made them so much better in that role, then that was a blind spot. That can often happen in service, but not if you focus on experience. You don't have that blind spot anymore. You start talking about the experience from day 1 instead of the service that we give. And in conversation is not so much about courtesy behaviors as about impressions. And when it's about impressions, you can say what kind of impressions you expect this person to make. And if they aren't making it, you already had the conversation that lays the foundation for you to even write them up if you have to. Or change them to a different spot. So if she says, well, I'm sorry, it just can't be me. I'm just not that way. Change them to another spot maybe. That kind of thing. From teaching body language, this is the last thing that I covered. How about teaching acting principles? And here's why. I find too many of our service-oriented programs that are based on courtesy try to tell you things like face the person, look them in the eye, lean forward, don't cross your arms, keep them natural at your side. You know, that's what we mean by body language. We try to teach people body language. Well, do you think this gesture I just did, which I'm only aware of because I wanted to tell myself, what did you just do you think that this gesture was planned in any way? No, now it is because I'm trying to make a point of it. But when I first did it, that came out totally naturally. Your body language comes out of what you are thinking. Body language is attached to your emotions and to your imagination. That's why scripting it makes it look so stilted and it looks like acting. It doesn't look natural when it's scripted. So I've never heard of a director saying, you got to do this with your hand and then do this, and then I want you to do this, and then I want you to do this, I want you to lean forward. You know, that's not the way a director does. He's going to say, what are you thinking about? Because I'm not getting the right feeling here from you. And because, why? Well, it's what we're thinking about, what we're in imagination that comes out. And so consequently, to spend a lot of time getting people to pretend a certain gesture and not have it come naturally. See, I believe that if you pose the right imagination question, a person will give you the right body language. But it has to come through imagination. So let's do an example. You look out here and Connie, who is your frontline receptionist. Let's say it's radiology or someplace where they do outpatient treatments. And so you see Connie out there, you've just been to this class, and so you're going to kind of, she doesn't know you're watching her, but you're watching her with patience, and typically she's so concentrating on what she's doing that she doesn't look up. There's a body language problem. She not only doesn't look up, that when somebody comes up and clears their throat, she tends to go like this, just a minute, and keeps right on working, see, for a little while until she finishes what she's doing. She's, okay then. And so you're seeing the body language stuff. And you say, man, you know, that's not giving the best impression. She sighs when she looks up. She goes like this in a minute. And then this person in interacting doesn't seem to know what the procedure is, going to be any pain. And the person says, you know, I'm not feeling very well and I don't know what to expect. And she says, well, just sit down and don't worry about it. They'll explain everything you need to know when you get in there. So let's say she just kind of cuts them off. And then the person says, well, you know, my husband, he was expecting me to be done and I need to know how long so I can call. Is there any way I could call my husband? If you say it's going to be at least an hour, is it going to be an hour? Oh, yeah, it'll be at least an hour. Well, then I need to call my husband. Well, you know, just sit down and we'll do the best we can. Let's just say you see this, okay? Not very helpful, and you see this body language and care for it. Now, there's two ways to deal with this. You can say to her, right, when somebody walks up to your desk, Connie, I'd like you to drop everything you're doing and look up and smile and say, how can I help you? Okay. Then, if they say to you that they're stressed about something, you say something apologetic, like, you know, well, is there something I can do for you right now? Well, no, I'd like to know how long. Let me see what I can do, how long. In other words, you go through your little coaching step by step by step for Connie. Now, what will she remember better and what will be more effective, that approach or this one? Connie, we need to have a conversation. Okay. She said, now, Connie, I've been watching you out there in front, but, you know, I've been wondering about, I want you to just imagine something with me. First of all, tell me, is there somebody in your life that you just dearly love? An elderly person that you love. You just love this person. Is there anybody like that in your life that's older than you? Because we love our children, and I don't want it to be about children. And she thinks a minute, oh, I got several people like that. Well, pick one. And tell me about that person. Oh, so she gets animated and she says, well, there's my Aunt Polly. She was just like another mother to me, you know, and I would rather go to her house than any other house. And it was so neat because she didn't make me go to bed, and we could make cookies, and she would read stories to me, and she's just the sweetest, most wonderful. She didn't have any children herself, so she just basically made me feel like I was her own kid, and she was just wonderful. When's the last time you saw your Aunt Polly? Oh, it's been several years. Well, pretend your Aunt Polly walked in today and you were sitting at your desk. And you didn't know it was your Aunt Polly until you kind of looked out of the corner of your eye and you saw it was your Aunt Polly. What would you do? Well, I'd be excited to see her. Yeah, I said, oh yeah, yes, I'd probably jump up and give her a hug. Okay, what else? Oh, I'd say, you know, and then she would go through her thing, and then I would say, well, what if she wasn't feeling very well? Well, I'd probably say, well, why don't you have a seat and I'll come over beside you and we'll fill these out. Well, I'll help you fill this out, this form out. See, if you're not feeling well, don't stand here at the desk and I'll help you with this. And what if she said that her husband was in a car somewhere and was waiting for word and they thought it would only be a few minutes? Oh, well, I would give her the phone. You see what I'm saying? What you would do with your Aunt Polly is through imagination is all natural. I don't have to teach her to do all of this stuff. If I give her the right imagination, she can see what she would do in her own imagination. And now here's all I would have to do, using imagination for the motivation. I would just have to say to Connie, I say, now, Connie, that's exactly what I wish you'd do for every patient who comes up here. Maybe not the hug, you wouldn't have to go quite that far, but everything else. And the way to do that is to just pretend that everybody for a while that walks up there, and if you need one for a man, think of a man that you just is older than you and that you just think is a wonderful person, somebody in your life. And when a person walks up and you look up, pretend it's your Aunt Polly. And just imagine, this is Aunt Polly, and then do what you would do for Aunt Polly. That's all we're asking for you here. See? You don't have to teach body language when the imagination's in the right place. They'll tell you what the body language would be. Which brings me to an interesting cultural question. People say that, what do we do about people that come from another culture? They're not used to being aggressively friendly. Women don't look men in the eyes, right? They don't look up. A man greets you first, especially a man with more status than somebody else. They have all these kind of rules that fit other cultures, and we Americans kind of all out in front, and everybody's up here, and nobody's too special to say hi to, and you be proactive in saying hello, and here we're trying to say all this about our culture, this kind of culture we want. What do we say to these people? Well, see, I grew up in another culture, so I know these people. I grew up among these people. I know exactly how you bow to the host when you arrive on their doorstep in China. I know exactly what that looks like. I know that you don't shake hands and sometimes and you do this instead and so forth. So what would I say to a Chinese person in our culture? Here's what I would say to them. Oh, it's all imagination. You put them in the right situation, and they will act just like us, just like the way we want to act. And this is all you would have to say to a Chinese person. Pretend that this is your home, and you are the host. And that people who are here are family if they work here. This is your family. Do you greet your family in the morning, or do you make a big distinction about who you say hi and who says hi first and who's the appropriate person to look at? No, not in the home. We don't do that. See, that's what we reserve for strangers. Okay, so would we agree then that if you saw everybody in this hospital as your family instead of strangers, you would have a different way of behaving toward them? Well, yeah, it'd be a little hard for me in the beginning, but is that what you're talking about? Yes, we see each other as family here. Oh, okay. Now, one more step. How do you treat a guest? Because when a guest has entered your family and come into your four walls of your home, what happens to your shyness? Your shyness goes. You're solicitous of their care. When they get up in the morning, if they're staying with you, you say good morning to them. You don't wait for them to say good morning to you. Because why? You're the host. You're the hostess. They're a guest in your home. See? And again, through imagination, we can get people to behave in ways they're not comfortable behaving, but we have shown them this is the stage, this is the experience we're trying to create, this is the way you think, and if you think in imagination a certain way, your body will respond normally to that, and we're not forcing them uncomfortably to do something that doesn't fit their personality. See, I wouldn't want Connie to act exactly like Sharon, when Connie is a shy introvert and Sharon is this big over-the-top extrovert. Now, it might be a little easier for the extrovert to do some of the things that I want, but what I really want from Connie is what she would do with her Aunt Polly, period. Because we know there's differences in people. We don't expect everybody to be an out-front extrovert. We just expect you to be your best friendly self with whoever you're ever friendly with. Bring that self right to work, that cheerful person to work, and treat us like family if it helps or whatever imagination helps. That's what I mean by acting principles are about imagination. Imagination governs our body language, and we can stop treating it like it's a left brain skill. It's not. It's a totally right brain skill. Imagination is in the right brain, so imagination is where those skills best come out from because they have to be natural. Did that make sense? I sound a little convoluted just there. Did make sense. I got one nod. I guess that's... Yes. Oh, okay. There's some more. Any questions here? Because I'm sure that this arouses some questions, and I think, even though the tape is running, doesn't matter. I want to take any questions, thoughts, or comments that you have. Well, I'm feeling warm since nobody's commenting.
So you're asking for
breaking out in a sweat here.
You're looking for an initiation of a cultural change versus, that's kind of the goals. It's almost from a hospital treating, or the staff being treated as if it's their home, their family, and to encourage the guests, being patients.
Yes,
versus the service excellence,
yes.
business atmosphere. So
yes.
what you're trying to do is literally a cultural change.
Well, I'm suggesting. Right, okay, because I'm only suggesting for conversations. Mm-hmm. And I would ever even expect or suspect that you could go out of a room and it would change because I said something about it, or that other cultures have done this. All I want to do is offer some hope that if you were to get together on some of these principles and decide this has some use for me in my department with my staff, that you then have the courage to go ahead and kind of share it with them. See, again, we're back to the conversations. Through the conversations, and you begin to elevate this, because in the beginning, remember, I said that this whole series was going to be conversations about culture and destiny. You've already described your destiny. You want to be, and I heard it yesterday in your groups, you described as the destiny to be, although we don't have the size and although we won't have the real expensive specialties that some university centers will be, and we won't probably have a med school attached to us. You didn't say that one, but in other words, you were talking about that level. We can have a distinct competency based on how we treat people. They will never be treated anywhere as good as they are treated here. And when you said that, you described something only culture can deliver. Service alone won't do it, because everybody is trying for better service. So I guess what I'm really wanting to convey is that at least my thinking about how to elevate a culture is sometimes to change some of the worn out phrases and paradigms that we use. Not that the other was not useful, just that sometimes a little change of the way we talk about stuff can bring a freshness to it, so that when it feels fresher to people, they listen better. It's like this whole section, you were all listening like this, because I think they had a freshness to it that you didn't expect to hear if it was all about service and smiling and saying hello and that kind of thing, see? But I think it's very real. I don't want it to be a play on words. This is what you suggested, is that it's a true shift. It can't be just, well, we changed some terms. It does change the shift to where we are trying to do everything on the left brain and getting in more into the right brain where our feelings are attached and making that happen. Your left brain can't control some of your body responses that are based on feelings. Do you know that? Well, let me explain what I mean by that. When you blush, can you stop it from blushing, or can you blush on cue? Can I say, blush, please? Well, you did. No. That's amazing. Oh, I put you on the spot. Well, you see, okay. You see, but it wasn't, you can't blush on cue. Now, there are cues that'll make you blush, right? Do you see what I'm saying? What I'm saying is this. It is what went on in your imagination, that little trigger of emotion that created this. What do you think a lie detector test really is? It's hooking the electrodes up to the part of the body that is hooked up to your emotions. And it's like blushing. Most 99% of the population cannot affect it. Just as you can't make yourself blush or stop blushing. It's in that same category. We call it the galvanic skin response. Because when you feel the stress of being caught in a lie, or being caught between trying to tell the truth and the lie and choosing the lie, there's an emotional reaction that you have so little control of, a machine can read it. And we trust the machine over what you say, because we know you can lie by what you say, but this machine doesn't lie generally. It goes off. Don't you think most of us have that phony test, lie detector test, inside of us somehow? So no matter what you say, I know what you're really thinking. If you think I'm stupid, it comes across no matter how respectful you are trying to sound to me. If I'm highly sensitive, and they were thinking, what a stupid, just like this doctor, I mean, made my mother feel stupid. I mean, he just basically, she could read that all the time. It's just that he finally crossed the line, see. And she knew it's because I'm 88 years old or 89 years old. That's why he thinks of me that way, see. And it insulted her, that kind of thing. So, back to this illustration of this. When my mother was in a really bad accident, one of her physicians came into the room with a phalanx of 4 or 5 residents. And my sister was there and I was there. And I was standing kind of against the wall. My sister was by the window. And he walked into the room, and he didn't say anything to us. He just stood there for a while his residents came in and spoke to my mother and took care of my mother and examined her halo. She had a broken neck, and a halo was... And they were doing this examination. And then they all quietly walked out. No involvement of the two of us in this process, just my mother. And the chief, not even involving my mother in the conversation, just out of the room. That's it, finished. All I'm saying is this chief could improve the behavior dramatically of those residents if he taught them this small technique of imagination. What if the chief said, and you're all my residents here, just before we go, now do you all know the case that we're looking at? This lady's got a broken neck, broken ribs, broken legs. She was in an automobile accident, killed her husband. Did you know that? No. Yes, she's been in an automobile accident. She was driving, fell asleep at the wheel, hit a tree. What's really happened? This all part's totally true. Now, all I'm asking for you is we know the x-rays, we know where we're going, we know what we're examining, but let's just imagine for a minute what she must be going through, and if those are her kids, what they must be going through. Just imagine that for a minute. Okay, shall we go on in? Do you have a feeling that when they come in, there will be a different tone? Do you have a feeling that maybe this chief would come over and shake my hand and say, "Are you her son? I'm so sorry that this has happened, and I understand you lost your father. How sad." Something like that might be said. Said what? Not as a canned thing. Coming from what? Simple imagination. A simple acting principle. Let's just imagine what the reality of this patient is and this family is for just a moment before we enter the room. And you would teach something so valuable to those residents to help them really become successful with patients in the future. See? That's the principle. I don't think it's fluff, and that wasn't what you were suggesting. It really is what you suggested, would mean that you'd have to have a pretty dramatic change. I also suspect that hearing this, you have these two feelings like, I would love to be able to do this, but I don't have the skills for it, or I'm not sure I could do it, or whatever. And that's where the conversation comes in. How do we do it? How can we do it? And with conversation, you build courage to do some things that if you only heard about them and went back to your desk, you'd probably say, okay, that sounded good there, but I don't think I can do it, So something needs to follow up in the way of conversations, would be my guess.